What's up, everybody? I had to reschedule today's recording because something came up for my guest last minute. It was going to be a very timely conversation about assassinations and terrorism with someone who's an expert in the field, but that's okay. We're going to record it at a later date, and honestly, it's going to give me more time to do my customary deep dives, which I wasn't able to do today for this because it was so timely. So instead, I'm going to share some thoughts that I have about what has been a truly tumultuous week in politics so far and for the country. I'm recording this on Thursday afternoon, July 18th. We're talking about like 5 days since the failed assassination attempt against Donald Trump. And in the middle of RNC week. Tonight, Donald Trump's going to be speaking, and I'll kind of comment a little bit about what I think he's going to say and how it fits into everything. It's wild because the last episode that I released was with Henry Olsen, and we recorded that right before this happened, and it was really focused on what was the biggest news, which was Biden's apparent decline, health decline, rapid decline, nonlinear decline in cognitive abilities, and his debate performance. And subsequently, we've seen a number of interviews and also teleprompter appearances where Biden looks like he's really losing it. I'm expecting him to be replaced or to officially step down from the re-election bid any day now. Maybe we can talk about that too. But let's just go back to Donald Trump, because this is a huge story. And we're going to talk also about the story about the story, kind of the meta-narrative here too. Let's start first of all with like what happened, right? Factually, what we know happened, because then I want to get into what I think is more interesting, which is the public's reaction and how all of this is being perceived and what the implications are. But let's just focus on what actually happened. What do we know? First of all, what do we know about the shooter? Well, so far what we know is he was a 21-year-old kid named Thomas Matthew Crooks. He was, from what we know, not politically or ideologically driven. Again, facts are still coming in, but what we know is when he was 17 years old, he donated $15 to a progressive political action committee. When he was 18, he registered as a Republican. His classmates remember him as being right-leaning. This is according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. He was apparently not a very good shot and was rejected from joining the school rifle team, but that didn't dissuade him from wearing camouflage and hunting gear to school. So he was clearly interested in guns and in weapons, which again, not that rare. But when you kind of look at the picture that's being painted so far, at least based on the preliminary information that's been released by the FBI, again, we'll get into some of the other stuff too. There's some stuff that's come out with his phone records and what he was searching in the days ahead of this rally, but he fits the profile of a archetypical nihilistic doomer with no clear ideology or set of political beliefs who may have been dealing with some combination of mental illness and too much time spent in online forums where there's a lot of talk of suicidal ideation and mass violence, which are often celebrated. So again, a lot to learn, but from what we have gotten so far, it's not clear that he was out there posting. We haven't been informed of what stuff he's put out on the internet. And it's also possible they spent a lot of time in encrypted chat rooms, so we don't really know we may not actually know what most of the stuff he was talking about. And that's relevant when we get into conspiracy theories about, what might have led to this. I also mentioned information that's come out of his phone has shown that he was searching for pictures of Biden and Trump. He was also searching for dates of live appearances of both of them. So some of the early theories based on information, again, that's been released by authorities is that he seemed to be somewhat indifferent in terms of who he could kill. He was scoping them both out. Again, the key point here is that there's no clear narrative that's already come out to shape the story of who this person was and what his motivations were. Besides the rifle that he used to shoot Trump and to kill an innocent bystander as well as maim two other people, he had at least two improvised explosive devices in his car that used a radio-controlled initiation system, basically a remote detonator. And I believe he had the detonator on him too. So this could have been much worse. We also don't know if someone else was involved. Again, we'll have a chance to talk about that in the conspiracy theory section of this thought process that I outlined. But overall, my conclusion here is it's still too early. It hasn't even been a week, right? Of course, it doesn't stop people, and it hasn't stopped people from theorizing about it responsibly, but mostly irresponsibly. We'll get into that. So that's sort of what we know, or at least what I think we know at this point in time on July 18th, Thursday, less than a week since the assassination attempt, about the shooter himself. Now, what do we know about the conditions that enabled him to get his shot off, the breakdown in security? According to a local news station in Pennsylvania, one of the members of Beaver County's ESU, their emergency service unit. So this is also important. There's local police and there are Secret Service, and they're working together, and presumably Secret Service is running point on all of this. But Beaver County's ESU team, which also I should point out, you guys may hear Beaver County. Yes, this was in Butler County, the rally. So I'm not entirely sure why Beaver County's ESU team was sent there. It may not be really relevant, but just pointing it out. They had 8 members at the rally, again, based on news reporting coming out of Channel 11 in Pennsylvania. They had eight members that included snipers and spotters. They noticed, at least one of these people noticed, a suspicious man on a roof near the rally, which is the roof presumably from which Thomas Crook took his shot, at 5:45 p.m. is when they noticed him. Trump was shot at like 6:11 or 6:12, so this is 26, 27 minutes before Trump was shot. They called it in. It's unclear what that means. Was everyone on the same communications channel? Were there different frequencies? Again, this speaks to the confusion and the incompetency questions, and this is all going to come out, hopefully, with both FBI investigation, but also congressional inquiries, and we'll get into that too. But they called it in, and they took a picture of him, who was later ID'd as Thomas Crooks. This is when he was on the roof. It's not clear that he had a gun. Presumably, he didn't have a gun 25 minutes before, right? According to the same local news reporter at Channel 11, another law enforcement officer also saw Crooks on the ground and called him in as a suspicious person with a picture prior to 5:45. And I think I might have that backwards. When I said previously that they called it in with him on the roof and took a picture, I think there was only a picture in one of those cases. But regardless, you have 2 different sightings, one on the ground, one on the roof. Not clear if he had a gun when he was on the roof, when he was spotted 26, 27 minutes before the shot. Presumably he wasn't. And so this was called in. Again, we also don't know what was going on with the comms channel. So an officer then checked the grounds looking for Crooks, couldn't see him where the first picture was taken. And then rally goers spotted Thomas on the roof only minutes before he opened fire. A lot of you will have seen these videos online. They were circulating immediately after all this happened. They were pointing to it, or they were saying, this guy is on the roof, or shooter on the roof, whatever they're saying. Apparently also, a cop went up to investigate at that point. We're talking about now minutes before he got his shot off. And from what I understand, Thomas Crooks pointed his rifle at him, intimidated him, in other words, and he started to back down and started to walk back down. And all of this must have happened right before the shots went off. So 2 timelines here. One is the noticing him, being aware of him with plenty of time to do something, calling it in. What does that mean? Looking for him, and then noticing him right before. And then the question really is then at that point, well, what's local police doing in terms of informing Secret Service, who's in a position to take the president off of the podium when they've literally just seen him right on the roof? So you would imagine that they would have been able to take him off. And I'm not saying that they didn't take him off because it was on purpose, or who knows, right? These are all questions that people have in their head. In the aftermath of all of this, the head of Trump's Secret Service detail has been criticized for not putting local law enforcement or Secret Service agents on every rooftop within an extended perimeter. The perimeter that the Secret Service had managed was small, and then as I understand it, they delegated a larger perimeter to the local police. There are also stories that there were at least 2 local police in the building where the shooter was, where Thomas Crooks was, so under the roof. Again, there's so much stuff coming out, and I'm just kind of giving you what has come out and what we know about what's been said. But things still need to be verified, and over time they will be, and hopefully in a transparent process. So the head of Trump's Secret Service, as I said, was criticized. I believe the head of Trump's Secret Service is different than the head of the Secret Service, Kimberly Cheadle. I think that's how you pronounce her name, Cheatl. She's come under massive fire, and she's scheduled to testify on Monday, July 22nd, before Congress. There's some reports saying that Biden's Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, is stepping in to block her from providing either testimony on Monday or testimony to certain information in agreed-to briefings with lawmakers at the House Oversight Committee. Again, these are just kind of pieces of information that I've gathered as I've gone through this process, but she's obviously someone that a lot of people are going to be focused on. She was at the RNC convention over the last few days, and some video came out of people attacking her verbally, really going after her, asking her a lot of questions. She was very evasive and left. The FBI, as I said, is doing a criminal investigation. They're looking to unearth the shooter's motives and other inquiries focused on security failures tied to the attack. And of course, Congress is setting up oversight committees to begin inquiries. So these are kind of the important things that I've been able to identify to keep an eye on going forward, and the things that I think all of you should be as well, and especially the congressional stuff, because this is one case where the fact that Congress is so divided politically isn't necessarily a problem, and it could actually maybe work to our benefit because the Republicans are going to be vicious in going after all of this stuff. So hopefully we can get a lot more information than we would if in other circumstances. So also the other larger point here in terms of conclusions is just like with the shooter, it's too early to know in both cases. We don't know yet. It's still too early. It hasn't even been a week. We haven't even heard from the Trump team. We don't know what they think. I'm not sure why they haven't said anything. That's also an interesting thing, that they haven't given out their opinion. So we don't really know. The investigation's ongoing. At first glance, based on my biases and what I've seen, this just seems like a lot of people screwed up really badly. I know it looks really bad, but it's hard. It's just hard for me to wrap my head around the conspiracy theory arguments. But, we're going to go through some of those, and it's important to keep an open mind. And that's what we're going to do here today. So let's talk about the public's reaction, which this is going to cover conspiracies, is going to cover the narrative that's being constructed, which I think is really interesting. It's going to also cover what I have seen in terms of a really kind of almost like a domino effect of people on the American right who have either been silently supporting Trump or maybe on the fence, who have really come out in support of him after this happened. Really fascinating. And we're also going to talk about the alternate reality game component of this, something that John Askinas, who's been a guest on the podcast before, has written about and talked about on this podcast. So let's start first with conspiracy theories. Now, I mean this quite literally. Anything that requires two people or more. So at a very broad level, I asked earlier with the explosives in the car, was there someone else involved? We don't know. This is also being investigated. It's possible that he didn't act alone. But that's not what most people mean when they say conspiracy theory. When most people say conspiracy theory, at least on the American right, we're not really going to touch on the conspiracies that are coming out of the left, which is that this was staged by Trump. I think that's so improbable, right? Because it requires that he wasn't actually shot at all, because that would have been too risky. No one could have actually shot that close on purpose. So it would require this whole thing was staged, that the secret security officers were in on it, because they obviously wouldn't have been able to be duped if Trump just shot some ketchup in his ear. So we're not going to even worry about that. But on the right, there are these, quote, deep state conspiracies. And I think it's good to take us just a second to highlight something before we move on, which is that this concept of a, quote, deep state started at some point. I don't know when it began as this word that entered the lexicon. I mean, I'm familiar with words like permanent government or the ruling elite, the governing elite, or stuff like this. Deep state is something kind of relatively new, but it's become a filter through which people are really interpreting a lot of stuff now. So it's hard to really talk about this clearly because we don't necessarily agree on what, quote, deep state is, but people have a general sense of what we're talking about here. And I think also it's important to note that the way that most people filter these types of conspiracies out is they think about who stands to benefit. That's really the question that they ask first and foremost. What I always say to people who come to me, because of course lots of people came to me after this happened, friends of mine. In fact, literally, I don't know a single person in my life who doesn't think that this is a conspiracy. I literally don't know anyone, and I mean that, like in my close personal life, except for my wife, and that's probably because I've trained her. She's probably spent too much time around me and become skeptical. So this is like a really widespread belief. First of all, I always tell people that if you're going to go down this road, you need a theory, right? Because one of the biggest problems with, quote, conspiracy theorists is that they're usually not operating with a theory. There's no actual theory. There's just a feeling and a cynicism or a distrust and a willingness to look for things that validate your view, even if you didn't have a pre-working theory of what you're looking for, right? So you're kind of just piecing together and creating a story. So you need to develop a theory at first. You don't have to have evidence to support it, but just develop a theory. Like, what do you actually think happened? And then as you discover information, if you find that that information is invalidating your theory, but you're finding new ways to spin it to confirm your overall belief system, that's a problem. So start with a theory and then look for supporting evidence. And that's just a basic job of being honest with yourself. And to that degree, when we're thinking about what happened here, I think when it comes to the shooter, the very first thing that I would be thinking about here is like, okay, so if this person didn't just self-radicalize, if this person didn't just end up as some kind of doomer on the internet who got violent, wanted to post suicide porn to the internet, if he was actually being steered in a particular direction, you'd want to find a handler, either a handler in the offline world or a handler in the online world, which is why it's so important to try and track his online presence. Like where did he spend his time? What was he posting? Do we know anything about who he was interacting with? Again, his phone is going to be super important for all of this. But of course, the problem with everything here is trust. And the public largely, if you're predisposed to these belief systems, you're not going to necessarily trust what's going to come out unless it says that it was a conspiracy. You know what I mean? So the same thing is also true for any kind of further information that comes out with respect to the Secret Service, local law enforcement. Again, because the other problem with the story is like, it would seem that you would need to have a lot of people involved here. You'd have to have local police involved because, again, like you had local police that spotted him. So then maybe we get to the question of the channels of communication and when they were calling this in, where was this going? What was going on with the frequencies? Like, there's a lot going on here. So I would keep a very open mind. Me personally, I haven't seen anything that makes me believe that this was, some kind of setup. And our government's really good at killing people. So I feel like if they're going to do it, they're going to do it right. They're not going to do it this way. But again, if you're predisposed to this belief system, you might think, yeah, well, our government's corrupt, but they're also incompetent. So of course they would do this. I don't know. So that's kind of my sort of initial response and thoughts about conspiracies. And I think it's just important to have a robust way of looking at it. And we don't have enough information as it comes along. Let's see. So the second thing that I want to talk about is narratives and aesthetics. And I'll explain what I mean about aesthetics. But in terms of narratives, first of all, I want to say this. I was watching a clip of Joe Rogan recently, and I couldn't agree more because I actually had the same feeling too. And I think he was just talking about the assassination attempt and the fact that, Trump had this incredible moment where he was pumping his fist in the air, yelling, "Fight, fight, fight," with blood rushing down from his face after having been shot in a failed attempted assassination with an American flag above him. You couldn't make this stuff up. It sounds like a movie, right? It sounds like a movie, and it's too perfect a story to tell. And the aesthetics of that story are so compelling. And so what's fascinating to me is how those aesthetics are so obvious to people and how you really began to see online in the online discourse, because it's really the online discourse that I think is consequential here. All the stuff that I'm really talking about is how things and events in the world and reality is perceived in the online world. And in the online world, people have a high level of self-awareness about narrative creation. And I immediately began to see people spreading these images, spreading these videos, and there was almost a kind of indifference about what actually happened or didn't happen. People just seem to be fixated about the substance of the, if you lack of a better word, iconography that was available and all the surrounding imagery that was available to be able to construct a story. There was just this opportunity to create a story and people just went for it. It was just too compelling. This former president getting shot, raising his fist in the air defiantly. And I found that really fascinating. I don't know if I'm communicating quite right, but it's just kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'm just older and I'm more skeptical and I've seen narratives get created. But there was almost a kind of like just indifference about the facts. Let's just tell this story because we really want to tell it. And the story that came out of this failed assassination was one of this figure, Donald Trump, this almost like mythologizing of this hero who overcame his persecutions and his persecutors to rise again on behalf of the American people and in service of the people who supported him. And you also saw in parallel this narrative about Trump being saved by God, that God intervened and made him turn his head to the right to face that screen on immigration. He was putting on a presentation or talk about immigration. He turned to look at it, and that's when the bullet whizzed by. And I've seen these computer-generated images online of the path of the bullet. And indeed, like based on these images, if he hadn't turned, he'd either be dead or he'd be a vegetable. So like it's a very compelling story. You're also seeing a lot of the, what I call them, the myth makers, the people that are in positions to tell stories, right? The people with the biggest microphones and megaphones. And in right-wing circles, those are primarily, if not entirely, not legacy media. So not the major newspapers, certainly, but also not Fox News. It's the Megyn Kellys, it's the Tucker Carlsons, it's the Candace Owenses, it's the Breaking Points, Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball. It's like all of these folks. And I know Sagar and Crystal are kind of not exactly, I mean, Sagar's kind of more right, Crystal's more left, but their audience is definitely people that are sort of in this crowd. So what you began to see, I just picked a couple of examples when I was writing out this outline after my guest canceled. One was in a monologue that Megyn Kelly put out about this. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but you can go and find it maybe. Maybe I'll link to it. But she basically asked herself in the beginning of this monologue, why did Trump do this? Why did Trump decide to run again? Why did you do? And she was very like emotional about it. Like, why would he do this? He had the perfect life. He had the perfect wife. He would just go to his golf courses and spend his billions. Why would he do this? And again, paraphrasing here, because he's a patriot who loves his country. That's what Megyn Kelly said. And this is a narrative that you're hearing again now more and more. It is. So there was something about this failed assassination that crystallized this for people, that moved people that maybe either were not voicing it or a bit skeptical to now saying, no, like he clearly loves this country. This is why he ran, which is fascinating because if you actually investigate a bit and you remember Trump and you know Trump and you've been following Trump for decades and the number of times that he's been involved in politics and his involvement in various stories or running for president, or even when he ran in 2015, when he went down the escalator and started running in 2016, you could construct a different narrative as to why. Now, whether or not this event changed him or the series of investigations in the last few years have changed him is a different story, but fascinating data point. Another data point is Tucker Carlson, who was recently speaking at Heritage Policy Fest. And of course, Tucker has intimated before, as I had brought up to Henry Olsen in his first appearance on my show, like a year ago or something, that he thought that they would probably try to kill Trump. And a lot of people have thought this. Let me be honest with you guys. I thought this too. I questioned whether Trump could survive his first 4 years, not because I have some inside knowledge, not because I thought that this was the right thing to think. I just thought it, right? I just thought like, this guy's really attacking people. He's attacking the CIA. He's attacking the government. He's attacking the military. He's attacking everybody. What Tucker said out loud was something that I think a lot of people were thinking on one level or another. So that's the background. But Tucker was at Heritage Policy Fest. This is like, again, a few days ago, I found the video and I posted it to YouTube. And he said, and I'm going to paraphrase largely here, but basically what he said was that because Trump got shot in the face, because he stood up with blood streaming down his face, screaming, fight, 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 in this courageous act of defiance, that he wins, that he, quote, wins. I mean, Tucker said this, he, quote, wins. And then he basically hand-waved away everything else that could possibly influence a voter as this basically bullshit. Everything else doesn't matter because what really matters is like he viscerally got up there. He showed his courage. He's a man. He's a fighter. He's courageous. That's all that matters. That sort of visceral, animalistic defiance is what matters, which again, very fascinating and an important part of, and also Tucker in an interview also made the same point about God, and he responding to a question about it, and his response was basically, absolutely, God intervened here. So you've got these religious themes, you've got this very visceral, animalistic urge to support Trump as a result of the fact that he was able to be so courageous. I mean, it really was. It was a courageous act of defiance in the face of what really would have terrified most people. And I think it breaks with a lot of people's narratives about Trump. A lot of people may not have expected him to do that. So these are kind of the narratives that have been coming out from people in the media. Also now, as I said, I'm recording this during the Republican National Convention. J.D. Vance stood up last night. So we're now Thursday. He spoke on Wednesday. He gave a speech about Trump. Again, same thing. He gave a story. He gave much of this story arc about Trump. Trump's family has stood up. They have also been, again, there's an active shaping of who Trump is now that is very different than what was happening before, right? It feels like the canvas has been wiped clean, is kind of what I'm getting at. Of course, there has always been narrative shaping about Donald Trump. And maybe a lot of that happened after he captured the Republican nomination, where something similar happened. And we'll get to this, the domino effect, because that was a point where you also saw a lot of people within the Republican Party flip to Trump when they realized that he was going to win the nomination. But there's also this blank canvas thing, where it's almost like a lot of people have just basically decided to forget about what they thought they knew about Trump because his response in those few seconds was so powerful that they're willing to rewrite his story. A lot of the surrogates, Trump surrogates speaking at the RNC, a number of them, some of the earlier ones, have used much more divisive language. And I highlight this because there's been a hope and some intimations that Trump is going to use this opportunity to unify the country. I actually think he is. I think that this is sort of like a strategy. You have other people putting out divisive language, but I think what's going to happen tonight is Trump's going to go in. We'll see if I'm right. Trump's going to go in and he's going to make a unifying speech. He's going to be the great unifier at the convention. So this is kind of the narrative that's coming along here that's being shaped, and I just want everyone to be attuned to it. I'm not making a value statement. I'm not telling you what is and what is not true. That's a way too complicated conversation to have, and obviously I don't have all those answers. I just want to point out what I'm seeing, the importance of the aesthetics of this moment, the self-awareness that people on the internet have about the moment and the ability to make it go viral and to be part of the narrative storytelling, and the people in the media who are really jumping on this story. To what degree it is a conscious attempt to get on the train of a potential Trump president. For example, this might be a big explanation for someone like Megyn Kelly, who in general has been doing this with Donald Trump. Remember, she had a very bad relationship with Trump. He was very insulting towards her. And he continues to say negative things about her and sort of accuse her of kind of grifting off his audience. But there is, look, if you're in the media and you have an opinion show and you are not catering to the left, and I should also note that if you're an alternate media person, it's much harder to build an audience on the left. And I'm not going to go into all the details as to why, but one obvious reason is that the institutional legacy media happens to be much more left. So there's just a huge competition in institutional media, which doesn't exist on the right. But also on the right, if you're going to be speaking to people on the right, you need to be on board with the Trump message because that's really where the audience is. So that's sort of my take on the narrative. Now let's talk about the domino effect. What have we seen here? Guys like Bill Ackman, finance billionaire, Elon Musk, the billionaire, the godhead, or the God meme, as Lily Frank has called him in one of our episodes together, members of the All-In gang like David Sachs. These people, some of them were already openly pro-Trump, like David Sachs, for example. I think someone like Jason Calacanis, who has always identified as a person of the left, I think now after this seems to really be openly pro-Trump, which is an interesting flip. And so you've got these folks, and they're really just coming out for Trump in a way that feels very like animalistic to me. It feels very much like dominance hierarchies. It's like, okay, we've all decided that Trump is the alpha male. Trump is the alpha. He's the silverback gorilla. Like, it's like they saw this act and they all just kind of like, you ever seen like how gorillas submit to a bigger gorilla? They kind of put their head down and they extend their arm out. It's kind of what I felt like I've been seeing. But I think also there's just a craving of a strong man. There's a bigger part of the country. We've been seeing this also in Europe as well. This requires a much bigger philosophical conversation and conversation about culture and what's happening in this moment, that explains this. And also it would require me to really think more critically about it. But it does feel like that's part of what's going on here. People just want a strong man. And Trump really gave them that in that moment. And I think there's also an attraction to power. These people are very wealthy already. They don't need any more money. They can be fine, right? So why would they rush to just really ingratiate themselves to this person that they think is going to become president? Because they sense that something is shifting in American political power circles. And they want to be on the inside of those circles, right? Something is shifting and they want to be on the inside. Because if Trump is able to win the presidency, and then he'll be winning it now with J.D. Vance as his vice president, they will be in a position to create generational change with a new Republican Party vision. We can maybe get into what that vision is, but sort of that's something to keep an eye on, right? Which is this domino effect of people in positions of power going for Trump right after this event happened. The last thing that I wanted to talk to you about public reaction is this concept of an alternate reality game. Sort of the larger game that's being played here, before we get into the specific game around the failed assassination, is Trump's fight against the globalists or the deep state. This is an ongoing thing, right? And you can think of this in the same way that you think of QAnon. And QAnon is just one example, but there are many things like this where there's a story, a narrative, and then there's real world information that's coming in that you can use to play this game, right? You can use these puzzle pieces to make inferences and come with theories and add to the story. We also have seen this with GameStop. I've talked about this on episodes on financial nihilism. You have the same sort of narrative arcs. You have the heroes, you have the villains, you have the real world, and you have the ability to play a role. And in some cases, the real world gets very real. Like in the case of QAnon, I believe someone actually went to try and kill the owner of the pizzeria where they thought there was a pedophile ring in the basement. So when it comes to this now, we've got this assassination, and you've immediately began to see, and this also dovetails with conspiracies, you immediately began to see people playing this game, right? There were high-resolution videos from every angle. There were diagrams of the rally. There were CGI diagrams of actually interactive stuff where you're able to see the paths of the bullet, interviews with eyewitnesses. There's, of course, going to be all the future comments by Trump and his surrogates about this that people are going to parse through. You have future testimonies before Congress. So all of this stuff. And also you have something else, which I didn't mention when I talked about conspiracies, which is, this is just one nugget, but it's an interesting one because it started coming out in the last 24 hours or so. There's a company called Austin Capital. I think it's Austin Capital Management, LLC. And they reportedly sold 12 million shares short of Donald J. Trump's, it's DJT is the ticker. It's Trump Media and Technology Group Corp. I've seen a lot of sort of, again, it's totally unverified, but apparently they bought these option contracts shortly before Saturday. I believe they bought something like $1 million worth. They would have paid out like $10 million. The thing that's also weird is it's been reported that the CEO of the company is Mary Cheney's wife. Mary Cheney is one of the two daughters of Dick Cheney. She's gay, so her wife is the CEO of this company. And there's also a connection to the Koch brothers, David Koch. So, I mean, it's also bizarre. It's also really weird, right? Like if you're looking at this and you're thinking, wow, this is a weird coincidence. It is a weird coincidence, but also it's like if they had some foreknowledge of this, wouldn't they have done it through a shell company? Wouldn't they have found some way to, instead of buying it right directly through their hedge fund or whatever this firm is? So this is also an example, right? This information keeps leaking out. And so what you have in parallel happening here is you've got this alternate reality game going on. And this is feeding back into the real world and narratives about the actual election. And it's influencing things. It's influencing things. This is not just some QAnon conspiracy. This is an active investigation of what's actually going on, while other investigations by the institutional authority are actually ongoing. So that's sort of like the public reaction. Now, how will this impact the race? I mean, your instinct is that this is it. It's over, right? I mean, that's how I felt when I saw this. I was like, that's it. He won. That's everyone's reaction. That was Tucker Carlson's reaction when he said, he wins, therefore he wins. Although I would say, famous last words, you would think so. Certainly if Biden remains in the race, which I don't think he is, as I've said. But you really don't know. We also just don't know because the opinions of people that you follow online, which forms your conception of what the overall view of the general public is, because that's your sample size, isn't necessarily representative. And so we don't actually know. The polls that I have seen are actually surprisingly tight. Most of the polls that I've seen are basically like Trump's up by like a couple of points, or they're like dead even. So I'm going to have Henry Olsen on. I'm going to have Nate Silver on the podcast in a few weeks' time to talk about this, before the elections, because I think it's important. And I know that this is important to all of you to try to get a grip on this. So not just all the stuff I just talked about now, which we're going to try and cover in other episodes, some of these cultural, more sort of meta-philosophical conversations about narrative and aesthetic and stuff like that, which is relevant. I also want to talk about the polls and what do we actually know. So we're going to do episodes on that. As far as Biden's condition is concerned, which is another important thing I wanted to just highlight, as I mentioned, we just found out he has COVID, or at least it's been reported he has COVID. He is just fallen apart, man. He did a couple more interviews at least since the Stephanopoulos interview. He did one with Lester Holt, which was awful. And he did another one with an influencer, which was awful. He's done a number of speaking appearances where he's speaking on a podium, looking at a teleprompter. It's sad. So I just cannot imagine. I mean, if I felt pretty confident he was going to drop out before, I feel like really confident now that he's going to drop out. So watching him, I don't know, even by the time this comes out, maybe we'll have a replacement. My guess is it's going to be Kamala. If they do an open kind of mini primary, great. I'm all for it. But it seems like she's going to be the one that's going to end up running against them. Also, I wonder what strong alternative would actually want to run against Trump in 2024. So that's also, useful to keep in mind. The other things that are on my mind after this attack are violence. Again, the reason that I had an expert in assassinations who's written extensively on assassinations, the trends in assassinations, not just in the U.S., but globally, and terrorism, is because I think this is an important story. Duh. You don't have to be a genius to think that, because we just had a violent attack. So it's something to look out for in the future. Is violence going to increase going forward? Are we going to have more issues like this? Who knows? But it's a good thing to think about. Since Trump has already picked his VP and it's J.D. Vance, we have much more clarity about what the Trump agenda is going to look like economically and foreign policy-wise going forward. In terms of his economics, Trump has said that he wants to enact a 10% across-the-board tariff. He wants to do tax cuts, at the very least corporate tax cuts. He wants Jay Powell to stay on board. This is fluid, though. Our experience with Trump is that he can change things. 10% across-the-board tariff seems crazy to me. I have a hard time believing that he would actually do that. It doesn't really make sense. I would expect to see more targeted tariffs, but suffice it to say, we're now moving definitively into the working class party vibes of the Republican Party. The rebirth process is, I think, more than halfway towards completion. The Democrats haven't even started that process yet. So we're going to be talking a lot about the economic implications of a Trump presidency in the next few months. I have a guest coming on next week who I'm actually going to have in person, who has been on the show before, who's an insanely popular guy in the economics realm. Many of you love him. You could probably guess who he is. And we're going to sit down. We're going to talk about this. So that's going to be great. Also, geopolitical implications. I would imagine that Trump would move pretty immediately to begin peace talks on Ukraine. Presumably, those will be on much more Russian terms than they would have otherwise been. It seems that the foreign policy of a Trump administration, based on some of the stuff that J.D. Vance has said, would look a lot more like what someone like Elbridge Colby would want, which is a pivot, much bigger focus to Asia, ramping up defense production. Again, the Biden administration talked about ramping up defense production. It's not entirely clear if the reason that didn't happen to the extent that people hoped or that they advertised was because of policy failures, or was it really just because of the limitations of the defense industrial base and the time it takes to build these things up? So we're going to be talking about this stuff. I have Jeffrey Sachs coming back on for a part 2, where I'm going to drill into some of the things he said in his part 1. And then I have another guest also who's much more of a hawk. We're going to have those conversations in the weeks to come. Guys, my closing thoughts on all this is, one, I mentioned it before, the rebirth of the Republican Party is much further along than it was when Trump basically decapitated it and drank its blood on the stage of the Republican primary in 2016 when he attacked Jeb Bush. I think they're more than half of the way through. The Democrats haven't even started the process yet. So that's going to be another very interesting story to watch. Like, what happens to the Democrats? Like, what is the process of rebirth on the Democratic side? It'll be a very interesting thing to watch, and I'm going to be doing episodes on it over the next months, years. You can imagine, because it's going to be a long process. I really think that another thing that people aren't really talking about, and I'd have to say this for a much larger conversation about culture, maybe with someone like Neil Howe to bring him back on, is the death of the World War II generation. I mean, there's basically no one left. The only people left now are really the boomers that were raised by the World War II generation, and my generation and Gen Xers. So basically millennials and Gen Xers who remember our grandparents. And I feel like that in my view, kind of explains why there is so much appeal for a strong man in the Republican Party, because I don't think, my sense is that you wouldn't have these kind of vibes appealing to people 40 years ago. I feel like people would be much more reticent given the lived experience of having fought in World War II against fascism and Hitler and the Japanese. So, I think it's something really interesting to watch and to think about as we look forward into these rebirth processes. Also, again, I mentioned, violence, Biden's replacement. I think it's also fair to say that the thing that usually makes news is the thing that no one's expecting. There was fear that, in fairness, I say that, and then again, people were worried that this might happen with Trump. But my guess is that there's not going to be some, additional necessarily some major violent event. Maybe there will be. We've seen talk of Iranians wanting to take out Trump, but it might be something else. And that's just important to note. Also, guys, last thing I want to say, sometimes I have to take weeks off on this podcast, or other times like this time, I release a monologue. And the reason why is because these aren't podcasts like anyone else's podcast. So much work goes into this, and you guys know this. And I want you to keep this in mind because I don't want to release stuff just to release stuff. And sometimes, and this is not the first time this has happened, a guest might have to cancel last minute. Sometimes I really want to talk about a certain thing. I think that it's important, and I'll have to wait a week to get the guest. Sometimes I need more time to prepare. And sometimes I need to take time to read things that aren't necessarily related to a particular episode, or to read books whose author is no longer alive, who I can't interview. And so I want you to understand, I've really tried to, and I feel like we've actually gotten to this point with this show where you guys have come to understand this, at least most of the people in the audience. I don't want you to think about this show as your regular programming. This is like a diary. I think that's actually a really good way to think about it. It's like I'm in university just like you guys, right? And I'm trying to understand things. And it's not going to happen on a predictable timeline. So I just want you to keep that in mind, your expectations about the show going forward, how I cover things. The reason why I'm able to do these, interviews for as long as I have is because the amount of research I do, and this is what differentiates the show. So I appreciate all of your support, and I look forward to exploring this incredible period that we're living through with all of you on this program in the weeks and months to come. Take care, everybody. If you want to listen in on the rest of today's conversation, head over to hiddenforces.io/subscribe and join our premium feed. If you want to join in on the conversation and become a member of the Hidden Forces Genius community, you can also do that through our subscriber page. Today's episode was produced by me and edited by Stylianos Nicolaou. For more episodes, you can check out our website at hiddenforces.io. You can follow me on Twitter @Kofinas, and you can email me at info@hiddenforces.io. As always, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.